Many days this happens, but I can't think of a time in recent 6 months or so that I have been this upset at my core. And also not feeling even worthy to bring you this information. It's so big, it's so powerful, it's so real, that to say that the communist Chinese now own the United States isn't even the tip of the iceberg. It is worse than that. It is all publicly on record that it's been planned. But China is only one layer of this. And so I want to go through what's happening currently and the ways that Hu Jintao has been publicly humiliating the United States at the pre-agreement with this criminal government, and why this is being done. It's very nuanced. But to sum it up, on record, Mao Zedong was put into power by the CIA and British intelligence. That's been released. That's even on the History Channel. It's admitted. They put him in power. The Russians wanted to nuke in the late 60s. That's now been declassified. China, they were worried about them. They could do the prospectus and the actuary on their rising power. They wanted to have a joint nuke on China. The United States said no. Russia was only confirming for itself that a secret behind-the-scenes deal had indeed been made. And there were cross deals with Russia as well. These are power groups working with each other, but also fighting with each other. But they believe in the power of the state. They believe in the power of the collectivist. They believe in transhumanist, social Darwinistic eugenics. And they've all signed on to the United Nations, and they're attempting to use it as a global vehicle where all of them tie into it, attempting to expand their geopolitical imperiums. And the corporations that profit from this sit above China, above the U.S., above Russia, and have vastly more wealth than the so-called debt. The United States is reportedly a little over $1 trillion in debt to the Chinese. $28 trillion in just the first year and a half of the banker bailout was paid to undisclosed offshore banks. A lot of it China, a lot of it EU, a lot of it private banks, brokerage firms, governmental central banks. When I talk about China and the EU, $28 trillion on their investments with J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, and others, the 6 mega banks. So we're told we have to be humiliated by China. Obama is publicly bowing to Hu Jintao, a dictator thug by any yardstick, who runs the country, who's got the biggest kill of human skulls around their neck of any country ever. Conservatively 60 mil under Mao alone. I mean, they have sports stadium executions every week in every city. Every major city has 14 mobile execution vans for petty crimes. You are just executed and you are gutted on the way to the airport. It's iced and flown into Japan, where rich Europeans and Westerners and Chinese and Japanese get the goods. Falun Gong are their favorite fruit because they're peaceful, they're non-resistant, they are complete vegetarians and health nuts, and so they are kept blood-typed and kept in jail cells and fed well for when their organs are to be sold. This is all public. There's so many facets. How do I even begin here? Harry Reid, of course, is in a lot of trouble for calling Hu Jintao a dictator. He actually got a slip of the tongue, kind of like Dick Cheney 3 times, Rumsfeld 4 times, said a missile hit the Pentagon. Then they talked about many times the shoot down of Flight 93, which the state police saw, the F-16s and the missiles, and they have the AIM-9 recordings of NORAD. We even know what unit, the Happy Hooligans out of the Dakotas, now disbanded, assigned to Virginia for drills. A general said, I don't care if there's a stand down. That thing's going into the Capitol. AIM-9, take it out. 2 AIM-9s, take it out. We even know the name of the general. They even had an award ceremony for it. Of course, I had Colonel Don de Grand Prix, former Black Ops commander, on to tell you that, and he was dead 2 weeks later. But we interview a lot of people that die, the D.C. Madam and others. Anyways, we'll be right back with that information. I'm sorry, I'm digressing. We're going to get into China in a big way. You want the full, deep understanding and scope and exactly what's coming in the future if they have their way. We're going to break it all down straight ahead. Stay with us.
And building economic ties. And we hope this progress continues because it's in the interest of both sides, the region, and the United States. Indeed, I reaffirmed our commitment to a one China policy based on the 3 U.S.-China communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act. I told President Hu that we appreciated China's role in reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula,
the Indonesian citizen,
that North Korea must avoid further provocations.
Up there with Hu Jintao, the communist Chinese dictator. He is elected by the Communist Committee, that is a group of dictators, so the appointed frontman of a committee of filthy rich, corrupt dictators who wallow with the wealthy robber barons of the West to destroy the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And, of course, he bowed to him again yesterday. He bowed to him again a year ago. Obama hasn't ever found anybody that he didn't want to bow down to. And I was watching some of the press conference. It was about how China is committed in helping the U.S. force through the Copenhagen Treaty. Really, that China is exempt from. And they build 2 to 3 new reactors a week, new power plants. They're also building a lot of nuclear reactors. And we build 2 power plants a year on average, because that's all the government allows us to have. And now the feds have come into Texas that's supplying power to 5 surrounding states, the biggest power generator in the U.S., and has told us we've got to shut down and then pay more. No judge, no jury. Congress didn't pass this Copenhagen, but what's the head of NASA and others call for? They said China's going to put tariffs on us if we don't accept the carbon tax. And, whatever China says, we better do. This is about groveling to China. It's been armed, it's been positioned, it's been put into place, and it's involved expanding worldwide as the New World Order's main hydra of tyranny, because it is a complete nightmare high-tech tyranny over there, on record. And you notice it's a total embracing of it. Covertly, the bankers that run our country, that set up the UN, have funded and created this monster and backed it up in the oppression of its people. And now there's a total embrace of it. Here are some of the headlines, and we're going to our guest. Meet the new boss. China owns the United States. But again, only through the bankers who sit above them. Continuing, China plants a flag on Constitution Avenue. Never before done. Hundreds of flags all over Pennsylvania Avenue, just flaunting it, so that when his lordship drove in on the red carpet and walked over the red carpet and then drove in, he would see the Capitol turned into a worship fest for authoritarianism. What does this tell you? What does this say here? Our government grovels to tyranny. Well, of course, we're setting a tyranny up here. Our government has exported tyranny and tried to put dictators in and death squads all over the world if the governments didn't serve them. Here's the London Guardian. China on equal footing with U.S. as Hu Jintao visits Washington. The U.S. has been taken over by the banks that got $28 trillion in just the last 2 years that they won't say where it went. But we're told we're owned by China, and they're our boss because they own $1 trillion. China's owned by the very same banking cartel. China's inferiority in hard power has turned Beijing's advantage and sights on its growing soft power abroad. See, the U.S. plays the part of the devil, as I've told you for years, taking over the world, torturing people. The CIA releases the torture, internationally wanting to destroy our name, but then domestically telling us it's good. So that we are now the new Hitler, and when we collapse, the world will rejoice, and then China will rise up with the EU, and that's the planetary regime. Then the U.S. will be rebuilt as a troop-supplying mercenary backwater. That's all been written about, all been planned by the globalist. China logs double-digit growth in the U.S. The U.S. has 2% so-called growth. That's with Cook numbers. That's what slavery does for you. China got stealth tech from Russia, U.S. lawmaker says. Analyst, what is the plan What's plan B if China dumps its U.S. debt? I mean, what did Hu Jintao say 2 days before coming here? He said the dollar's over. America's over. He knows full well all we've got's the dollar. He knows the decision's been made to devalue it. He knows the decision's been made to make the Chinese currency part of the new world reserve currency 30 years ago by the Trilateral Commission and David Rockefeller. It's all been written about. How did I know exactly what would happen? Because we understand the globalist. And it just continues here with what's happening. We have traitors within our government who can pass laws to shut down our industry to boost the stock in their companies that are overseas, in Mexico, in India, in China, and again, 160 plus other countries. It's very cold-blooded. It allows them to destroy freedom. It allows them to collectivize here as people lose their jobs and now fall onto the social safety net that was just for the poorest, that now is going to be for more than half the public that's on some form of government assistance. You can see where this is going. And the authoritarians are confident because they know having half the public on some type of government paycheck, those people will do and vote for whatever they're told to do by this corrupt system. And that's why we're in deep trouble. They are coming after the free speech. They are coming after the guns. They are coming after your farms and ranches and your homes. And they are going to have unlimited armies of people who couldn't get jobs at McDonald's in uniforms, trained to beat your brains out. So you better take your counties and your cities over. You better get good cops in there and good sheriffs. You better understand they're putting their federalized goons in right now and that we're in a horrible situation. The CIA is now operating in every major U.S. city. All illegal. Face scanning cameras, total surveillance, all illegal. Prison planet is being built. And that's the UN official program. We cover it in Endgame, online bibliography proving it in whatistheendgame.com. You constantly see, the head of space, NASA Goddard Center saying we need to be like the Chinese. We need a global tyranny. You see all these other professors constantly saying we need the Chinese model. We need to sterilize people. We need a one-child policy. Ted Turner a month ago in Mexico. China is the model officially. They have UN meetings there, like the one in 96, the UN Food Program, and they said, we will use food as a weapon, as Chairman Mao did in the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution. I mean, the Chinese have been chosen as the drone rock stars of the New World Order. They are the army. And the Chinese people aren't bad, but they've got a 5,000-year history of being enslaved and being killed and being tortured to death if they don't do what they're told. And there's so many facets to this. We have our media. We have our culture now with almost no criticism ever of China. Just 5-10 years ago, they'd criticized China, killing people for organs and their secret arrest and things. And now it's just, oh, China is wonderful. And the Associated Press says, well, it is true. They own our debt. They're kind of like our landlord now. I have the quotes here. They're in Paul Watson's article today. There's 2 articles, actually. Meet the New Boss, China Owns the United States. That's prisonplanet.com by Alex Jones and Paul Watson. Here's a Kurt Nemo. China plants flag on Constitution Avenue. Now, on paper, the Chinese, quote, own the majority of the debt. But remember, that's 1 trillion, 100 billion or so. Where'd the 28 trillion go? That's 27 times or 28 times what the Chinese supposedly own. This is all just about breaking our will. If the TSA can put their hands down our pants, if we can see Chinese flags, not done for the British, not done for the Russians, not done for the Chileans, not done for anybody. I mean, they put red Chinese dipped in blood flags, blood red, yellow star. That banner's got more dead under it than Hitler and Stalin combined. They put that up and down the street, and now Harry Reid is in the New York Daily News being excoriated, and they lit up the Empire State's Building for China, for their 4th of July, for their National Day. All of Times Square has been turned into a pro-Chinese government event. They're opening restaurants all over Europe and the U.S. called Mao's, and I see kids everywhere wearing red stars. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's fun. It's fun to be a slave. And then I think about national organizations out there. Remember a few months ago, a group against the national deficit ran a minute-long TV ad where a Chinese president, Citizens Against Government Waste, where the Chinese government is up there bragging to a group of college students about how America fell by being in debt to China and how they bought cheap goods and how they had too high a taxes and regulation. That's actually what China teaches. And he then brags, that's why we took over America. That's why we own America. We have links to news articles in China, to TV pieces where the Chinese government is actually pridefully speaking about how we are their enemy, but they own us, and we're pathetic, and we're decadent, and we're bad, and our own media is agreeing. Again, this is about just totally getting us ready to accept any and everything. So I want to come back and go through all the news on this and what this means and what it means to have Obama bowing to him. In fact, we'll show you that again on screen as we go out to break. But I want to tell you the master plan, where all of this is leading, where it's going to go. Bless your soul. Do you really think you're in control? That's what I'd say to the New World Order crowd out there. All right, let me do it. Let me break down the China situation as calmly as I can. China, of course, was the ally of the United States in World War II. The United States was already promoting socialism towards communism in the United States. Deals were made with China. Chiang Kai-shek was given faulty armaments. The right wing in America said that it was all staged. Decades later, it was declassified. That Mao Zedong was put into power by our government. But in the name of fighting the red Chinese threat and the Russian threat, a police state apparatus was built, witch hunts were expanded, attacks on free speech, federal control from behind the scenes under the guise of national security of Hollywood. All of that got cemented into place. Now, it's not that our owners, the robber barons, are really communist. As Carol Quigley, the Georgetown political science head, Bill Clinton's main mentor, wrote, he was given access to the globalist, what he called the British Roundtable Committee documents for several years, to write a 1,000-page tome for the planetary controllers so that they would have a couple thousand copies to give to high-level State Department, CIA, and others. He published it on a limited run, and it was a private publishing that was done, and it was only several thousand copies printed and given to high-level gophers in government so they could understand how things really work and operate. The plates, of course, were surreptitiously smuggled, and it was reprinted brazenly by patriots in the 1970s. And I loaned it to a newspaper reporter about 2 years ago, and he never gave it back. In fact, I want Aaron Dykes, if you have to, go over to that guy's house. I know he lives here in Austin. I want my 10 books or so we loaned him back. Side issue, let's just order another one online. I think they're like $50, though. It's a big hardcover. The one I have is actually an original. But original reprinting from the 70s. It's thousands of dollars for one of the original. I think it's $2,000. But see, that's the problem with history. I say I'm going to give you detail. I'm going to break this down. This is all facts. This is all massive knowledge proving everything I'm saying. So I don't want to just make statements here about what China's doing and where we're going in the future. The point is, Quigley said, we use communism, we use fascism, we use socialism, anything that collectivizes the general public to get control of them. And then we'll use a fascist leader, a dictator, a communist leader, socialism. We don't care. We want power centralized in very few hands, so we can move towards this global corporate state where there will be no freedom. And he went on to say, I believe humans want to live in tyranny. This is our natural state. This is a good thing. He also published publicly the Anglo-American establishment and bragged about that, kind of a public book, but watered down a bit. And that's only, I think, 300 pages long. I read that when I was about 15 years old, but I haven't read it since. Like, that was the first book of Carol Quigley I read. But the plan was always to build up China to menace Russia, while the United States was used to fund Russia and give it armaments and secrets, and Ford and GM and all of them, huge factories building army trucks, and U.S. engineers helping build the Russians' nuclear reactors, giving them the A-bombs and then killing the Rosenbergs as patsies. Because, again, if you look at this as Russians or Chinese or Americans, you're blind. This is the global banking cartel who funded both sides in World War I, who funded all the sides in World War II, who going back more than 300 years in Europe in those endless wars was constantly funding all the different armies, all the different sides. And they don't care. They always got paid. And governments would crack down on the public. The public would tend to roll over and let them take their land and let them tax them into poverty. If, after all, it was a war, if, after all, their firstborn son didn't come back from the front, you bet they were willing to starve to death and have their other younger kids with their ribs sticking out because Junior got killed fighting Napoleon, or vice versa. Meanwhile, Napoleon was publicly being funded by the Rothschilds and other major banking houses, and so were the Brits. There was the Rothschild family in France funding Napoleon on record, and when Napoleon took over the first time, they got more land than his new royal house he set up got. That's why almost all the good vineyards in France now are Rothschild. I mean, just like the big banks now of the 600-plus islands off Greece worth billions apiece, private bankers are getting their own individual islands. That's how Greece is paying them. And the bankers sold Greece the derivatives and made the profit, and now we're saying, oh, you can't pay this other stuff back. Here, give me your islands. I mean, this is carpetbagging on a scale that makes the mind spin. You know what carpetbagging was? The South was completely wasted, burned, destroyed by Sherman, and there's just starving people all over the place, and here comes people with money with their big carpet bags buying everything up for pennies on the dollar. That's what carpetbagging is. The globalists are wreckers. You go back to every culture, and at key straits around the world, they would build fires in foggy bad weather to confuse ships and think that they were lighthouses to bring them into port, to wreck them on shoals so that they could then, under laws that all those countries, England, France, Aboriginal systems had the same laws that, well, if a ship's wrecked, it's not stealing, it's fair game, whoever can salvage it. And if a ship runs into rocks, quarter mile out to sea, it's freezing cold, almost everybody's going to die. And then you go out when the fog clears and get all the goods out of the wrecked ship. That's what corporate raiding is. They go in, take control of a company. They're never going to pay the stockholders. They just sell everything off and then bankrupt it and keep the profit for themselves. That's what the New World Order is. And then you're homeless, so you can't stand up to them. They don't just not care if you become homeless or if you lose your job or you lose your farm or your self-sufficiency. They don't want you to have it. And a lot of folks are saying, where does China come into this? Oh, it's going to come into it. So, it is on record that our government set China up from the beginning. And 100 years before that, China was divided into 12 parts, and the U.S. had its own sector. China's already been run by the West for hundreds and hundreds of years. How'd they do it? Drug trade. The Chinese made heroin illegal, opium illegal. And they just came right in, and they bought off all the police and the military and the population because the Chinese made it illegal. It made there be huge profits, and that's how British and U.S. intel, the Germans got their piece, the French got their piece. The French ran Vietnam because they had to get that opium out of there and out of Laos and out of Cambodia and sell it up to the Chinese. And that was a way to control them. I mean, you think all these Prozac ads, all these beer ads, all these drug ads are an accident? They figured all this out a long time ago. So, China's been New World Order run for several hundred years. The Japanese got too big for their britches. Thug governments all act the same. Doesn't matter if it's our government, Ahmadinejad, doesn't matter if it's the Japanese. Avarice-filled, dominating men of power, who are ruthless, and who enjoy war and destruction and control, they rise to the top, as all philosophers have noted throughout history, because good men lay down to them. Good men are more intelligent, stronger, better, everything. But we have a blind spot. We can't believe it's happening to us. We can't believe other people are like that. We want to buy into the fake little narratives of the people, you know, singing the Star-Spangled Banner while the flag still waves at a football game and all the guys crying, they're there with their son. Meanwhile, what America was and what that flag symbolizes and all the blood that went into it, a great idea, the most noble in our history, has been destroyed. But you don't care. You just want the symbol. You want the symbol above the substance. If I could have the liberty back and if the people could awaken from their slumber and their trance, I would rather have freedom in this country than that flag. The only reason the flag has any positive meaning is because it symbolized the spirit of 1776, which the system has tried to defile and pull down and demonize, because it wasn't perfect, but it's the best that's ever been. Now, this China situation, China has been set up, China has been deployed, China has been built up with tariffs and taxes and regulations and carbon taxes and all these other fines and fees and controls on our industries, on our power plants, the environmental rules, the workers' comp, all of it. And a lot of it is, you know, great on the surface. But China and India and Mexico and 160 plus other third world countries are completely exempt from this global government. The global government is run by the big mega banks and mega corporations and retail corporations that are their subsidiaries, who openly write the international rules. So they write the rules where it's hard to have a job here in the U.S., it's hard to develop anything. Big Agri-Pat tries to pass more rules to shut down farms and ranches to make it nearly impossible to even provide our own food. Once the breadbasket of the world now can't even supply our own food in many cases. We're being brought down. We're being made dependent. We're being put under siege. How do you make a city fall, a nation fall? You put it under siege. You cut its food and water off. You cut its intellect, its will to fight off. This is all psychological warfare by the globalists who play the U.S. off against Russia, Russia off against China, China off against Japan, China off against South Korea, South Korea off against North Korea, the U.S. off against China. It's all back and forth while the bankers sit up above it. They've stolen more than $50 trillion total globally, and that's, again, an old number. $28 trillion in the U.S., disappeared, won't say where it is, but we're told on CNN, in the AP, all over the news, yes, it's China. America's done. China is the boss. China is great. China is the model. China knows best. It's not father knows best, it's China knows best. We've got a leaderless, fatherless country. We've got a childlike nation of dumbed-down people who've been taught that being weak is cool, and then you've got a giant mechanized slave country, and I know a lot of folks that have lived in China and been there. I mean, the police will just cut your testicles off in the middle of the street for fun, and you'll routinely just see people on the street corner with their pants pulled off and police walking by laughing with their genitals cut off. I mean, it is, we were sent video by a guy that's done graphics for us because his girlfriend's Chinese. He stayed a few months over there, of youth brigades marching in the middle of cities, just with red flags. And I mean, it is creepy. Troops marching, total telescreens with troops announcing China's taking over. We're going to get the U.S. Their top generals are in the news every day saying we're preparing for war. The U.S. is our enemy. Meanwhile, our media is, oh, China is so good. And by the way, I'm not joking about that. The police, it's just a reign of terror over there. Paul Watson's wife is Chinese. You know, she speaks perfect English and lived in England most of her life. The point is, she's Chinese. She has family in China. He was over there with her, and they just wrote an article about the Rand Corporation wanting to have war with China in the future. And her family and people got questioned, and she got put on a list and was told, you better not write for prisonplanet.com anymore. That's the authoritarianism of China. Reaching into England, reaching into prisonplanet.com, reaching into my free speech. And now, oh, Harry Reid better not call Hu Jintao a dictator when that's what he is. He is a dictator. He's elected by a committee of dictators. So it's a dictatorship of the inner party. And man, you see films of their party conferences. What a group of preening, sycophantic devils. It's not about their art, their literature, their inventions, what they've done. It's all that their grandparents were murderers with Mao Zedong and knew how to sycophantically lick his boots. China is a giant North Korea that the elites in the West openly saw and went and funded and empowered and tilted the playing field to give China everything. And then when Americans point out how we've been deindustrialized, we're told, shut up, fat, dumb Americans. It's your fault this has happened. Really? Have you read NAFTA and GATT? Have you read the WTO rules? On taxes, China's much lower. Environmental regulations, there are none. Their rivers literally catch on fire routinely. Carbon taxes, harassment of power plants, they build 2 to 3 a week. We build 2 a year. Zero. Everything tilted for them. They have to put nets up at all their major factories that make the Apple goods and others because they were having suicides every lunch hour. The people are chained to their systems. Around a third of the population lives in giant public prisons that are locked at night. You're locked in your house, locked in your neighborhood. Your children are taken at birth and trained and brainwashed and turned against you. Then they are sent to work half the week at factories. 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. What's our government's answer? More regulations, more taxes, more carbon taxes. Now, what's going to happen with China? It isn't that Americans are dumb idiots and buy the Chinese slave goods that break by the time you get it out of the box half the time, that are covered and dripping with every poison you can imagine, and the melamine-filled milk and the poison drugs, the prescription drugs. It's that you go to a store and 95% of it is made in China. Oh, yeah, people were dumb 30 years ago buying Chinese goods. But now, see, we're held by the throat. The truth is we don't need all this crud. I'm going to come back and break down what's going to happen, what they're doing, and why they're openly over here humiliating us with our president bowing with Chinese flags up and down Pennsylvania Avenue. China is the dominant engine of the world government. It is collectivist. Their leaders are bloodthirsty eugenicists who are anti-family, anti-Christianity. They are embraced by the eugenicist elites out of England, the United States, and Europe. If you go back 30 years ago, the Council on Foreign Relations said the 21st century will be the Chinese century. We will be deindustrialized. We'll have a currency war, which will really be a currency devaluation. Then we'll come out with a global ban corps. They also called it the Phoenix. And now the IMF last year officially announced they want the ban corps. That will be partially backed by gold, issued by the private central banks, and also partially backed by the Chinese currency. And we would cover this 15 years ago on air, and people would laugh at us. Oh, China, they could... Now, this is the most important point. I'm coming to it now. China, they can never take over America. China, they can't do anything to us. China has no power. Why, we got 20,000 nukes. You know, the Chinese, they can't even get a rocket into space right. And so Bill Clinton and Laura Allen Hughes give them the ICBM technologies to get their long march into orbit and to be able to hit anywhere in the U.S. But that's not enough to get one ICBM up with only one warhead. That'll only destroy Chicago or Dallas or Los Angeles. You've got to have it when it pops open. It's got to have MERV. It's launched from its launch pads in northern China, up over the poles. That's the shortest route. It's coming down over Chicago or New York, back into the atmosphere. The nose cone blows off, and there are 12 to 24 warheads. But you want some dummies, too, so that any ground-based lasers or missile-to-missile systems or railgun anti-missile systems. Ooh, those are highly classified. That'll get the NSA humming right there. If they're trying to shoot down the warheads, not going to be able to get them all. Okay? So they give them everything. Oh, we'll put more taxes, more regulations, more environmental stuff on the U.S. China, you get none of it. Then we have all our politicians lecturing us. You need to be more like China. The head of the Goddard Space Center yesterday. America's going down because we don't accept carbon taxes. China's smart. They're authoritarian. China's exempt. He knows that. They're giving us a false narrative of why we're about to collapse. We're being told that anything, a cyber attack could collapse the whole economy and cause bank runs and a shutdown of the currency any time now. And 9,000 telescreens are going in, now announcing the cyber attack's coming. Get ready, the whole web could be shut down. Homeland Security's trying to keep it safe. See, they're getting everybody ready for this to happen. And then there'll be pipe bomb attacks all over the country, blamed on domestic groups as they're collapsing it, so that anyone saying no to the collapse of the U.S. under the corporate global government, backed up by their attack dog, the murderous, all-time killer Chinese, the record killers. No one, Hitler, Stalin combined, could not touch them. And now our media, they're good, they're our leader, they're moral. Just all these leaders constantly, Ted Turner, just on and on, praising China, praising. I got a giant stack of news here today praising China, just how they are so wonderful. And I've talked to a lot of friends and family that have been there. China is hellish. And the cops are just completely arrogant, walk around like ring wraiths, just beat or kill whoever they want. It is just lawless evil. But I run into businessmen all the time that are in business with China, and I'll be sitting there just a few weeks ago to get some Mexican food, and I go up to the bar to pick it up. My wife says, hey, I don't want to cook tonight. We put food up. I'm coming home at 5:30. I go, sure. I go in to get the food. I'm waiting at the bar, and there's a guy going, hey, Alex, I've seen your show. Do you know how great China is? You know how wonderful, how they get things done? America's pathetic. They get a problem with an executive there, they just execute them in a week. That's how we need to be soon. And I didn't even argue with the guy. I didn't say, oh, really? That's why their lakes catch on fire and their rivers? Oh, that's why the Communist Party's so filthy rich and they keep the people down and forcibly sterilize the women? Oh, that's really beautiful. But see, it's this sycophantic thing. As long as you go over and grovel to the Chinese communist, then, oh, you're all part of the sickness of it. Same thing in the 30s when Hitler was a rock star in the U.S. My grandfather grew up in Dallas, and the Dallas radio stations would play Hitler speeches and say how great he was, with English over it. Cover in Time magazine, just he is, life books. Stalin's great. Mussolini's great. There's this love affair, and of course, it's not that the elites are stupid and got fooled by Hitler. They were building him up to destroy him. And that could be the case with China. This is very sophisticated here. But if you think of it as America against China, or America against Russia, or Russia against China, or Russia against the U.S., or vice versa, that is in two-dimensional, like playing checkers. This is an advanced game of chess. This is geopolitical stratagem, where you've got the globalists, the robber barons, the banks, that sit above the two-dimensional players of China, Russia, and the United States, all deeply in debt. All their infrastructure is financed through fraud by the banksters. The banksters' wealth is in the quadrillions of fraudulent made-up digits. And their entire global police state is about forcing you to accept those quadrillions as legitimate. Their mega Ponzi scheme. Their pyramid of total pyramids. You understand that? They know exactly what they're doing. And so it's a balancing act through the UN, through the IMF, through the World Bank, through all these regional boards where they're always jockeying with each other, playing the nations off against each other, the race to the bottom, the destruction of the middle class, the destruction of the infrastructure, always competing with the authoritarian China, who takes their 10-year-olds and puts them in slave factories. They're now openly saying they may drug the water supply in China to stop the epidemic of suicide. See, it's not that the society's sick, it's that you're sick because you don't like working 18 hours a day in fumes in the iPad factory. So that our kids can be in the matrix, not communicating with friends and family, just staring into their iPad or their iPhone. Not saying an iPhone or iPad is evil of itself. How it's being built is evil. What it's doing to us, what we're allowing to happen is evil. Now, there's also a war on being able to recognize evil. They tell us there is no evil. Let the government do whatever it wants, but then it moralizes to you all day about how you should feel guilty and give up your rights. So that's the key to understanding this. China, we are being told, is the owner of America. We're seeing the Chinese flags. The AP says that's to let Americans suspicious of China know they shouldn't be suspicious. No, it's meant to throw it in our face. It's meant to get us ready for more outrages. We're being dragged through the mud. We're being conditioned to accept all of this. That's what Richard Nixon was about. That's what Bill Clinton was about. That's why all of it came out, that he was doing all these things with cigars and lying and raping women and selling things out to communist Chinese and murdering Ron Brown and blowing up Oklahoma City. It's meant to just get you to where you totally just accept that they do that and they get away with that. Just like the TSA is going to put their hands down your pants to train you. And now it's in the news that even if you refuse the naked body scanners, they make you walk through them, though. See, it's just that little act of submission. Okay, I'll arrest you if you don't do exactly as I say. You're allowed to opt out. Just a regulation. All made up. But I want you to go ahead and walk through anyways in front of the people. And they admit that's to condition everybody else watching that it's safe. They don't want to see one of the sheep not going into the slaughter pen, even if you're not going to slaughter that Judas goat, you know, the goat that leads in the other sheep, but then goes out on the other side. They're making you become a Judas goat. It's all animal psychology. The minute you use your higher order thinking, the minute you start scanning their scams, the minute you start analyzing what they're doing, the minute you decide to not just receive it like a chump, it's all over. But it's up to you. So, here we are. And they're humiliating us with these announcements of how China runs our country. And they're overrunning the nation and filling all the new people that are brought into the country that could be helpful parts of the nation to empower the country with their own nationalism to hate the United States so they can balkanize us and all control us. And it's that same strategy globally. The global government is a global corporate empire that has all the wealth, and then now they're basically scapegoating China as our owner. But they're scapegoating them by saying how powerful they are, by saying how great they are, by saying they run America. Remember how they did that in the 80s with the Japanese, and Americans were all upset. The Japanese are buying up America. The Japanese done got us. The Japanese were being taken over by the central banks. The central banks were the ones doing it, and they got Japan suckered in to the fast money. And so that incredibly productive country has been in a 15-year depression and is never coming out of it. And it's the same thing. China is a horrible hellhole, and by the globalists praising it and giving it pride, in China, that makes the people not rebel against their government, the good people of China, who have been rebelling with pickaxes and hoes and shovels and beating the police and military in provinces all over the country. I've seen the videos on YouTube that are snatched down quickly of just farmers who are sick of having their family land taken, who are starving to death, just running with hoes and attacking police, who then start shooting them. And then you just see the farmers overrun everyone, and then the tape cuts out. And our government, pull that off YouTube. Don't let people see that. That'll embarrass our Chinese friends. So this is meant to make the American people hate the Chinese people. The Chinese media is always demonizing the U.S. That's meant to have their people hate us. While it's just the corrupt, bloodthirsty elite of China with the corrupt, bloodthirsty elite of America and Europe and the UN, they're all teamed up building this global government that's designed to actually cull out most of the population, because we're not just cheap. Life isn't just cheap. It's seen as negative. So the big issue here is that the global government is a corporate fraud government that sits above all the countries, and they're playing us off against each other. China has a 100 million population. India is now over 1 billion. Both countries are firmly under globalist control. And they will just play the nations off against each other and will export Chinese authoritarianism worldwide. You know, it just came out yesterday that China is now giving more money to the third world than the IMF every year. And when you hear about the IMF, that means our money. They take our money that we back up with taxpayers, and the private bankers openly go in and say, here's the money, now you got to spend it with this private company. That's on record. That's all been leaked. The BBC's covered it. And it was IMF World Bank loans that started China. And now Americans buying cheap Chinese slave goods have financed what's happened. And like a dealer, and that's what China is, selling us crack, the American people cannot stop buying the Chinese slave goods. They have sold their liberty, their freedom, their future. They've deindustrialized us in the name of the Xbox, in the name of Connect, that face scans you and tracks everything you do in your house and has a microphone and a camera that watches you in your home. And the government admittedly is dialing in to these systems and watching you, and the OnStar. I mean, and selling us that authoritarianism is good. There's this conversion into tyranny happening, and China is there to lead the way. And when they, quote, give countries, you know who mines the majority of the minerals, rare earth minerals now out of Australia? It's not even the British government. It's the Chinese. And the Australians are freaking out. I mean, the Chinese are coming in, taking over almost every mining city, and they're demanding stakes in the, in the domestic minerals themselves and actually taking the country over. And they control over 90% of rare earth minerals that go into all the gadgets as well. They have a strategic plan because they're the collectivist model. And where does David Rockefeller spend a lot of time? Who was involved in creating the system? David Rockefeller, who admittedly set up the modern UN as we know it. That's how powerful these people are. And so they're going to use China to muscle out what's left of Western industry and everything else and force that giant sucking sound, that complete implosion of the economy that will render us subservient and dependent on them. But we must not hate the Chinese people. They are fighting back. They want freedom. You know, our media back in Tiananmen Square halfway praised them. Today they're decried. The Dalai Lama is kicked out the back of the White House. He's called a feudal dictator by the news. And he's certainly not perfect, but compared to the Chinese communists, I mean, they did take over Tibet. They do force Tibetan women to marry Chinese males. And of course, they're all Asian, but the point is forcing you to marry, ending the culture. The globalists want to end all cultures. Again, they sell the communist Chinese murderers like they're rock stars. And that's what this is about. But it'll also create, at a subconscious level, envy. Americans love thinking they're number one. They're real into that. When America that has been dead a long time, I'm trying to resurrect it. And we can do it with your help. So it's having the other effect of people calling for more defense spending and feeling incredibly threatened, which is what the Rothschilds would always do. They'd sell one armament to the Austrians, and then the French had to have the better one. And then the Austrians had to have the better. Then the British had to have, and always one-upping each other. So this is the perfect way to enrage Americans, coming out and saying China owns America and putting Chinese flags up everywhere in Washington. Now, let's go to this clip put out by Citizens Against Government Waste that was banned on History Channel, ABC, Discovery Channel, and dozens of other channels. This is not allowed to air in America because you can't be critical of our new owners, who themselves are owned by the bankers that make them look like paupers. Here's the clip of the Chinese professor. Beijing, China, 2030. Why do great nations fail? He's teaching the commies. The ancient Greeks, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and the United States of America. They all make the same mistake, turning their backs on the principles that made them great. America tried to spend and tax itself out of a great recession. Enormous so-called stimulus spending, massive changes to health care, government takeovers of private industries, and crushing debt. Of course, we own most of their debt. So now they work for us. And that is actually what is taught in China.
You have to join Citizens.
That is actually what is taught in China, and that is what is in their news. Chinese general says ready to nuke U.S. You know, that sub launching the missile. And our military is just busy training to take our guns and, fighting Muslim terrorists publicly funded by the CIA. Again, the globalists fund the communists, they fund the Nazis, they fund the Muslim extremists. A lot of them don't even know they're being funded from, upline, downline. This is geopolitical master stratagem. And this is not my opinion. I didn't just figure this out. I read Dr. Henry Kissinger. I read Dr. Brzezinski. I read the stuff Newt Gingrich has put out, who's praising Obama.